My background is that I was born in Africa, and I think most people who are brought up in the British colonies, we tend to have uh, dispassion for our tradition. And like most people, I did too. I was completely against the Indian tradition and Indian culture for a lot of reasons. I remember going to a temple in Africa, and the women that would sing there, it sounded so bad that it would scare the gods away. The way they would sing. So, and I realized, a lot of what I saw in the Hindu tradition was mostly superstition, ritualistics, and all the negativity that I did not really appreciate. And so then I decided to stay away completely from the whole Hindu tradition. And then I came to the U.S. for undergrad, and I studied 2 engineering degrees. And during that time too, when I started interacting with Indians, I found also quite a bit of negativity. And after wasting like about 3 years working with the Indians in America, and I was the youth representative at that time. And I realized, we're not going anywhere. So from then on, I decided to stay away from Indians and Indian culture, Indian tradition. And I did incredibly well when I decided to move into the American culture, because anything I did, I was supported. In the Indian culture, we tend to pull each other down, unfortunately. So with that encouragement, I never looked back, and ended up getting a degree in engineering, computer engineering, and then in computer science. So I was one of the first top 75 experts in the country in data communication at that time. So it really took me to a high place, and I remember lecturing around the country, in Marriott hotels, where people like from IBM labs and from Bell labs, and they would show up to my lectures. They were these old white men, and then I was this little kid, a foreign kid who was standing there, and they always thought I was some like assistant, and before we started talking about our seminars, they would expect I would wait a little bit, because on the first day, people are trying to find the room and where to come for lectures. So most of these guys would start saying, where's the speaker, where's the lecturer, they'd get really impatient. Yeah. So I'd say, well, we'll start, and then when I stand up on the podium, they'd get really surprised that I'm the guy who's, and you'd see their faces, they almost wanted to get a refund back, because they didn't expect me. So what I would do then is actually, spend the first 15 minutes talking about all this jargonistic, bombastic presentation of all these terminologies from the technical side of the computer world. And then within about half an hour, then their attitudes would shift, and then we would start doing real teaching. But then after 3 years of doing that, then I decided, I needed to get involved with the business world, because just being a technical person wasn't what I wanted. I spent most of my life searching. So even when I was 15 years old, I started reading the Bible and the Quran. And so I know about the Baha'i, the Sunni Muslim, Shiite Muslim. I know about different sects of the Christianity, Lutheran, Protestant, Roman Catholic, and I actually went to a convent school for 7 years. And at the end of it all, especially at that time when I was also struggling with Hinduism, I realized that all religions actually basically said the same thing, but then, we were all killing each other based on, in the name of God, based on religion, and that was a real problem for me. So then I started looking at the Western world, because I figured, the Western world really went to the moon, and they don't have these issues that are holding us back, So that was my whole gravitations towards science. But then I went to business school, and in business school, again, I got 2 degrees there too, from one of the best business school in the world in international business. It's highly reputable. And then I decided to do something for humanity, because that's what I wanted to do. But at the same time, I was still searching. I was searching for the meaning of life, searching as to why we're suffering so much, trying to figure out what's going on in the world. And like I said, I started from my childhood. When I went back to Tanzania to work with my family and help them through their businesses, and I went through a major crisis and lost everything. And then that began to ask those questions again as to why do we exist? Why do we suffer so much? And from that, I stumbled upon astrology. And my mother had actually seen a Jyotish in India, and whatever he had told her all came out true. So I was pretty amazed, as an engineering mind from the West, is that how come this guy who has never seen me or I never met actually knows about my measly little life and what I'm going to. And it was very specific. It's not like, you're a Leo, so you have long. It's not stuff like that. It was very, very specific about what would transpire. And so that again triggered my curiosity again as to how can this work. I was still against the Indian tradition, so I stumbled upon Greek astrology. So that's when I went to Greek astrology and started inquiring and studying more. Ended up working in that realm also as a manager, and we were doing research in Greek astrology and Greek philosophy. As I was doing that, there was a group out in California, Westerners, Americans, who wanted to set up a college in Ayurveda, and they had decided that I was the only person who could do something like that. Because prior to that, I'd set up a college of Vedic astrology in Sedona in Arizona. So then I went there and looked at what's going on, and then decided, well, no, that's not what we should do. However, when I was in Africa, I was doing venture capital. So then I brought the venture capital concept into this tradition, because we have so many experts, but then they don't have the management skills or they don't have the money. So we started something called the Ganesha Foundation in California, San Francisco. And what I would do then is sit on boards and help those people who have written books and are very well known in the Indian tradition or in the Vedic tradition. I would help promote them. I would help fortify them. After working with them for about a year or two, I realized that something was missing, and I didn't know what it was. I went through a sort of a crisis, an internal crisis again, and I said I needed to find a teacher because there's no other way. And I needed to study Sanskrit. Those were the two things. The question is, with so many fake gurus around, how do I find one? And then I decided, well, if I'm meant to have a teacher, the teacher will show up. So I came here actually to this ashram, Ārśa Vidyā, here in Salisbury, Pennsylvania. And I only came here because my Jyotish teacher was teaching a class here. And I didn't want to go to an ashram. I was completely against swamis and people who wear orange robes like I'm doing today. So with my bias and prejudice against these forms of culture, I still came because I had no other choice. And when I came here, I was very happy with what was around. Nobody was doing fundraising. They were not pulling money out of me, and and so on. And everyone was so nice. So then with that, I did my course and then went away. And then there is Swami Pratyagbodhānanda here, who somehow found me a little interesting. And so he took my data, my bio, and my CV, and he passed it on to Pūjya Swāmiji. Now, I didn't know this. But while I was going through my internal crisis and saying, okay, well, if I'm supposed to have a guru, the guru will show up, I just waited. I didn't think that this was part of it, but I went to Vancouver, and I was having a wonderful time for 3 months there. And suddenly I get an email, and Pūjya Swāmiji, in his very casual style, understated style, he always says, I will be. He sent me an email, which I didn't think that he actually typed. It must have been somebody, But obviously, knowing how things work here, they don't quote Swamiji unless he specifically stated something. So Swamiji said he's going to be in Salisbury in August, September, and if I have some time, please visit. That was it, And I was looking for a nimitta. I was looking for a sign. And that was the sign. And I said, hey, here's a guru coming to me. But I was so skeptical, and I was very suspicious about gurus. So I started inquiring. I made about 60 or 70 phone calls to everyone I knew. And I said, is this guy authentic, and does he know what he's teaching? I didn't even know Vedanta at that point. I just said, does he know what he's doing? Is he authentic? And they all said, oh, he's authentic. He's the real deal. So I was still skeptical. I had to come down and visit him. So then I flew down from California, and then came here and met with Swamiji, and it was instant. And so at that point, he's then suggested I go to study in Nagpur, where I did the 3-year course with Swami Pratyagbodhānanda. And it was our first batch that we were there. And so then with that, what happened was I decided to focus on. It was a strange world for me to actually give up the luxuries of the West, and now suddenly you become a brahmachari and you going through that lifestyle, which was very, very hard, especially in the beginning, because there were no facilities, and I figured, this is what I need to do right now, and so it was okay. So we finished in 2007, and since then, I've been here and traveling and teaching, and very, very discreetly, actually, without promoting myself or saying anything. And then in February this year, Swamiji invited me to go to Rishikesh, and then in March of this year, I took Sannyasa Diksha, which is something I was completely against. I was completely against because wearing robes in the Western world it carries a certain stigma, partly because of the reputation of all the other predecessors of people who came and wore the robes. But so I resisted it a great deal, in fact, until the last minute. And but Swami has an amazing vision, and his foresight is truly, truly incredible. And having taken the robes now, I realized that my teaching has so much more impact than it has in the past. And so now I'm here and, traveling around the world, lecturing and promoting Vedanta. Not only promoting Vedanta, but also promoting Vastu, Jyotish, and Ayurveda, because this is also part of the tradition. And there's so much glory in this tradition that it's truly incredible. I've done so many things in my life before I came here, and pursued Western knowledge, Western ideas, and the only satisfaction I ever got was after studying Vedanta. The only peace I ever found was studying the Shastra. So when I look at the Shastra and what it says, to me, it's so real and it's so correct. Because of my journey through lifetimes of looking at different things and then coming back. And so what the Shastra says, there's absolutely no doubt about it. If you can get to the point of actually understanding it the way the Shastra is meant to be understood, then there's absolutely no doubt. It gives you the greatest contentment and the greatest happiness that we are all looking for. We don't realize it. Yeah. What we are looking outside for, money, wealth, and fame, and none of that will give you the kind of happiness that Vedanta can give you. So, and I speak from my personal experience because I've had fame, I've had money, I've had luxuries, and nothing has made me happy. It's the teaching, and particularly Pūjya Swāmiji's teaching was really profound.
We last said this reminds me of
That's right, yeah.
So when you studied the course, was this under Pūjya Swāmiji's?
Yes, it is under. Pūjya Swāmiji has a disciple up in Nagpur, and in fact, it was also an interesting story how that came to be, because there is a very, very amazing guy, or there was a very amazing guy. He was very young, and he had about 20 PhDs in Maharashtra. He was, I think, a minister at some point in Maharashtra. But this guy was truly an amazing guy, and he and Swamiji, he wanted to set up a Gurukulam there because he's from Nagpur, and it just started. He invested a lot of money and set it up. At that point, when I met Swamiji here, I wanted to go to to go to Rishikesh to study the 3-year course. Of course, we always tell Swamiji what we want to rather than listen to what he says. And then he says, no, there's a young man there. I would like you to meet him. And unfortunately, just before the course began, he passed away in a very nasty car accident. And so I did not meet him, but I ended up going there. It's Swamiji's ashram with a very, very able teacher who was Swamiji's disciple. Yeah. Brahma Prakashananda is truly an amazing teacher.
And you also you mentioned that you were acquainted with Swami Pratyagbodhānanda. So
yes. Oh, yeah. The one person I truly value in our tradition is Swami Brahma Vidyānanda. And he's something who had an impact in my studying early on when I went to Rishikesh the first time. And this whole culture was so foreign to me, and in certain ways it still is. My only exposure was the 4 years in India, and I couldn't make sense and had a tale of the whole tradition, and I ended up meeting Swami Brahma Vidyānanda during his sannyasa, his diksha, and then we connected very well, and I spent 4 days with him, and he then put me on the right track, which I really credit him for helping me understand the teaching. And so every time I go to Bombay or pass by, I have to, get this darshan and visit with him. And of course, when I ended up going to see him, then Swami would be there, and so we'd have some nice laughters together. And she's quite intelligent and very eloquent in English. So
yes.
So
you probably spent a lot of time close with Pūjya Swāmiji as well. So could you share some of your personal experiences with Pūjya Swāmiji, some of the things you learned and what sets him apart in your mind from many of the other teachers that you spoke about?
Yeah. When we study anything, it becomes book knowledge. And particularly the Shastra, when we study that, it's so abstract. Like, how do you practice? And like I said, I didn't know anything about this tradition. And so after having studied the teaching for about 4 years, then I came back to the ashram here, and I'd spend time with Swamiji here, and I also spend time with him in Nagpur whenever he would visit. And I would see the teaching alive. Swamiji made the whole teaching so alive that you could not but just see how he lives. His lifestyle was Shastra. There was no distinction between him and the Shastra. And so in that, I learned how to inculcate the teaching in my own personal lifestyle, just by watching him, how he talked to people, what he did, how he would decide, And here he is, an amazing guy who has about 60 projects or so, who actually does it all without any kartatvam. There's no doership in all of it. And it was really amazing to see how that takes place. It's like, how does a person do so many things without doing it? And because the teaching tells you that you have to give up your kartatvam, how do you do that? And watching Swamiji was truly, truly amazing. And I've learned so much from spending time with him. And in fact, I try to inculcate those same values and the same behavior. I am not as compassionate as he is, but, I try. Like Swamiji says, fake it until you make it, I try to fake my compassion, but, I don't think I'll ever get to that point where he is, He's truly, truly amazing. But there was also a lot of other things that that he had shared in some of the private moments we've had. One of the things that was so fundamental for me that I didn't really understand was the traditional teaching. The teaching does not take place without punya. In fact, there was one single moment we had in Nagpur, because Nagpur is such a remote place that even when I would invite people, I say Swamiji is here, nobody would come, because it's so far away. So we had a lot of time together, and I said, Swamiji, we're talking about the vision of Vedanta. And he said that he got it right away. And when he said he got it right away, all he wanted to do was not do all the things he's doing now, but all he wanted to do was to teach serious students, people who are seriously interested in Vedanta, and that's all he wanted to do. In fact, he started doing that. And he would say that if someone did not get this vision, did not understand Vedanta, then he had to present it differently. It was his fault. So he took the blame upon himself when somebody didn't get it. And it was, you know, that statement was so profound to me, because as a student, I realized how hard it is to get it. And for him to say something like that was sort of like an unnecessary burden, frankly, which he also realized. And then he continued to say, he said, well, after 50 years of teaching, I realized I cannot teach this. And I was a bit surprised, because he's created some great teachers, you know, who have understood it and who have gotten the teaching. He says, no, they got it because of Punya. Now, you know, you have, and he said it with such a, you know, disheartened voice that my compassion totally went towards him, because here is someone who is doing something for 50 years of his life and then realizes he can't do it, you know. So what he was trying to emphasize at that point is that, you know, yes, he does teach, and he's the greatest teacher that there is, in particular in Vedanta. But then it really takes tremendous punya, as the Shastra will also validate, that in order for us to get this vision, to get this knowledge, we need punya. There's no other way. But to have Swamiji hear that, it actually shifted my thinking tremendously, just that one statement. Because then I realized the acquisition or the pursuit of punya becomes a primary tool. The worship of Guru, tomorrow is a Guru Purnima day, the worship of a true teacher. The culture has a purpose in that. The culture actually sort of goads people into that path of life where we try to acquire punya. We're not told why, but everything that we do is to gain punya so that we can stumble upon the right teacher, so that when we do stumble upon the right teacher, we can then have more punya to understand it. Usually the example I give is, if somebody came and offered you $16 billion, wouldn't you worship that person? I mean, people worship another person for a lot less. But here is Swamiji, who then, through this teaching, wipes out your sanchita karma. You know, that is the greatest gift that there is. And I realized that in the teaching, while, of course, through his teacher, through his disciple, because Swamiji wasn't around to teach us, except for a couple of Upanishads. And I said, oh my God, you know, the value of a guru really is the fact that that person becomes instrumental in wiping your sanchita karma. That means all your pain and suffering in the future gets wiped out. Not by touching you, which is commonly understood in India. That doesn't happen. It happens by actually you dedicating yourself towards the study of moksha. That's the only way. But if the teacher, the right teacher, is there to work with you, to remove your psychological blockages, to remove past life blockages, to remove all kinds of baggage that you have, so that you can see the vision, that is a monumental task. That is actually an amazing, amazing gift that a guru can give you, because there's no amount of money, no amount of seva, no amount of gratitude you can ever show to a teacher like that. Yeah. In the end, I just felt complete worship for him, complete worship, unquestionable, because of what he has done. Yeah. And, you know, frankly, if you see what he teaches, and if you gain the vision, there is no doubt about it. There's absolutely no doubt about it. So yes, he's been profoundly instrumental in my understanding of the teaching. And just to watch him, I think I've learned a lot more by watching him rather than the 3-year course. The 3-year course was definitely an amazing journey. It was an amazing teaching. We had about 7 hours of classes every day, including prayers. And so it was what I call the boot camp. of Vedanta, and having that background and then meeting Swamiji and seeing how he lives it was a great teaching, and I try to emulate that. I'm not sure that I quite do a good job, but I try my level best to emulate him as much as I can. Yeah, yeah. The teaching is truly incredible. When we understand it, it's the greatest joy we can feel. It's an internal joy that nothing else matters in the world. It's so profound, and really, I have when I look at the Shastra from different perspective, not only from Vedanta, but if you look at it from Jyotisha, Vastu, or other disciplines that I've been studying, there's absolutely no contradiction in the teaching. Although there seems to be a lot of contradiction, but those contradictions have to be understood within a context. If the context is understood, then everything is very well placed. It's such a brilliant teaching. In fact, it's my joy now to continue to bring it out and express it to people and show the beauty of the tradition, which is unparalleled, frankly.
It's very true.
Yeah.
Could you also share a few thoughts on your role as a teacher, and what are some of the things that you're currently doing right now?
Yeah, I think a lot of what I'm doing right now is I'm spending about maybe 80% or 90% of my time trying to bring an awareness to the teaching rather than teaching the Shastra on a day-to-day basis. What we have realized, or what I have realized, is that there is something truly amazing. The Vedic teaching, or particularly Vedanta, is the greatest gift to humanity, and we don't know it. We don't know the tradition, and we don't know the value. There's so many people that don't even come to it, or even those that come don't even invest time in it. Swamiji had said that. He said when he wanted to teach serious people, he just wanted to focus on teaching Upanishads, and he didn't want to do anything else. But then he also said that there are no takers. And if there are no takers, so what do you do? So then he ended up doing all these other things, other projects, so that people can eventually come in. So I am doing similar things right now, where I'm trying to promote the teaching. But mostly through encouraging people to do the Gita home study that Swamiji has written. Because what you have in the Gita home study really are Swamiji's words. So it's not my interpretation of Swamiji's words. And it's also in English. So they can read English, they can understand it. And everything written in the Bhagavad Gita home study is so incredible that Swamiji has woven in so many aspects of the tradition in a very, very practical way. So all you have to do is read a few passages, read a few sentences, and that will transform. So I have many groups around the country, and actually even in Argentina now, and other places around the world that I travel. I just encourage people to read the Bhagavad Gita, even though they might not have heard what Bhagavad Gita is all about. But then they do read it, and my condition is that they have to finish at least 3 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita home study before I can even begin to spend my time with them. Otherwise, if they cannot commit, then I don't want to commit. I don't want to waste my time. I don't need to. And so if they can commit, then I will commit. Amazingly enough, many of the Westerners who are studying Bhagavad Gita can't even pronounce some of the names, but they have been very, very committed. I have an amazing commitment from many of the Western readers of Bhagavad Gita. And with the little knowledge that they have gained from the Bhagavad Gita home study, they have started changing. I see the Gita home study is really about objectivity, how to be objective. It's karma yoga. Yeah. And you can be objective on your daily basis. The question is, if you do understand how to be objective, then you practice it in your daily life. When you wake up in the morning, how you interact with your family, how do you interact with your pet, how you interact with your coworkers, you apply objectivity all the time. And you find that as you apply those principles taught in the Bhagavad Gita, that you will actually have a better time. People will respect you more, you become more productive, you become more respected, and you become more satisfied. So it's been a profound teaching anyway, just within the first 2-3 chapters. So that's particularly what I'm doing right now. Yeah. And I'm trying to bring Vedanta in different parts of the world. So, hardly in one place. I've got commitments out in Philippines, Japan right now, and England, Spain.
So are you going to be addressing, particularly in Philippines, the English-speaking audience over there, or will there be some other acharya there who speaks their language?
No, what happens is in Philippines they speak English. Like English-speaking places, I speak in English. In non-English-speaking places, I do speak in English, but there's a translator. But they somehow get the message. But whole point is there's with the advent of yoga right now, there's tremendous interest in Indian philosophy, Indian teachings, and I think some of us young acharyas from this parampara, we bring in sort of like a fresh air to the teaching in the sense that people can relate to us, and so that becomes also very instrumental and encouraging for people to sort of participate in this pursuit.
Yes, especially those daunted by Sanskrit.
Yes, particular. My Sanskrit actually is not very good, so it works out fine. So, but we need to know Sanskrit in order to convey those specific concepts, which other languages don't lend themselves to. In fact, English is really a primitive language to teach in. It actually really, if one is not careful, diminishes the teaching. We have to really pay a lot of attention to the nuances of the meaning of the words in order to convey the meaning. I've learned also Swamiji has spent so much time polishing his presentation, polishing the nuance of the language. So I try to do that same thing, is like, emulate him in that way too. And the choice of words that's being used and so on. Yes. So
I think that's one of the things that Pūjya Swāmiji is so well known for, choosing the right words at the right time.
Yeah. It's so vital, because if you choose the wrong word, it actually conveys a different meaning. And then the person who's pursuing this teaching loses it. Because if you have a stumbling block, you never get over that stumbling block. So as a teacher, you have to be very, very careful of how you use the language. And particularly, it's a foreign language. I mean, it's not, there was a tradition actually in the ancient times where this teaching would not be allowed to be taught other than Sanskrit. It has very good reason for that. But then, how many people know Sanskrit? And English now is really a common language. English is a relatively new language. It just came into creation about 1,000 years ago, 1,200 years ago. So it's very primitive. It does not convey the meaning that we want to convey. So it's a real struggle. So how do you take something that is so glorified and then translate it into something in a language that is so primitive? You can't, and it becomes really, really hard. So yeah, we try really hard to work with those words, and then introduce gently some Sanskrit words so that people are comfortable with it, and they don't run away. But even when we introduce those words, we make sure that they understand the meaning of the words more deeply than it's presented, so not casually, so.
Very true.
Yeah.
So does anybody here have questions? You can.
Yeah. What are some of the other challenges you faced while imparting Vedanta to the seekers out here?
Yeah, that's a good question. The biggest challenge really is the person's baggage. We all have baggages, and they come in different forms. And the question is, you see, if you are teaching this in one culture, then you have one set of baggage to deal with. You can confront, and you get good at dealing with one set of baggage. In my case, I'm going around the world. So what happens is that every part of the world, and even within that part of the world, depending on your upbringing, depending on the religion, then even those baggages vary. And you cannot apply the same tools of removing that baggage, because as a teacher in this tradition, you have to remove the baggage. That's how you actually help the person gain the vision. Yeah. So you find that in the Western world, or people who grew up with Christianity, that becomes the biggest stumbling block, especially when you use certain terms, and when you use certain terms that the Vatican used, or Christianity used, immediately those blocks come up. And so then, they start becoming defensive and they don't want to deal with it, or they don't want to know, So it's a very gentle process of trying to convey the vision without triggering those blocks. And when they're at a comfortable space, then you say, okay, now let's deal with this block, with this baggage one way or the other. So I find, having said that, I find it easier to teach Westerners than to teach Indians who have come from the Indian tradition. You see, with the people who have not been exposed to this teaching or to the Indian tradition, don't know anything. And because they don't know, I shouldn't say they don't know anything, they're not aware of the tradition or the teaching. So what happens is, yes, they have different baggages, but then when they come to this exposure, when they get exposed to this sort of tradition, they are more open to it. They are more welcoming of it, and they are open to learn. The problem with our Indian folks who have studied, like the Bhagavad Gita, they just assume they know. And what they know is not really the correct version of what they know. And so that actually becomes more of a stumbling block then, because they already have preconceived notion about what you're trying to say. And so they're not open to the teaching at all. So then you have to sort of retrain their mind. And they're very resistant, because supposingly they had a guru, supposing they had a teacher, that said this way, this is what you do. Then when you come here and you say exactly the opposite, then then you find a whole different resistance to deal with, and that becomes a little harder. If they came to the same parampara of Pūjya Swāmiji, then it's not a problem. But that means they've dealt with those issues elsewhere. So, yeah.
One more thing I remember you mentioned about Pūjya Swāmiji's understanding of psychology along with Vedanta, and how he uses that as a tool to impart the teaching as well.
Oh yes, you cannot, frankly speaking, we have a lot of teachers, but if you don't understand the psychology of your student, it becomes very hard, because how do you remove those baggages? How do you remove? The Shastra inherently does it for you, but it's always an extra help if the teacher knows some psychology. Now, Swamiji is amazing too in psychology. He had quite a lot of Western students who studied psychology, and Swamiji is very well versed with the Western psychological concepts that he can, and even having said that, he actually sees a person and knows their psychological makeup, knows their baggages even before they even talk to him. I've seen him deal with me and my psychological issues, for so long, and frankly, I wasn't the greatest student, in fact, I rebelled all the way. But he's been very patient and kind with me. But I wouldn't say that I'm one of his best students in terms of dealing with you. So, but when you understand the psychological issues, then you can see how we respond, how we behave, and the Shastra will trigger those. They will undoubtedly trigger those issues that you have. There's no way out. And so interacting with the student is really, really important on a personal level. So that is also part of the traditional teaching. You cannot, that's why this is something you cannot study in books, or you cannot study by listening to tapes. The tapes and the books are sort of an aid to help you understand the material easier. But what happens in this teaching is that you got to have the teacher and the student live, present, so that the teacher can see the blockages in you when he or she says something. Yeah. Now, in a tape or a recording, the teacher is not there to unlock those complications. Because the more you listen to the tape, then you start listening to it more as a technical item. And you might move forward in that technical item, or understanding the techniques or the jargon or the meaning of it. But you're carrying the same blockages with you in the teaching. So that's how it happens. That's how people don't get it. And so you find Swamiji has always been against recording these videos, or teaching through the internet or through electronic media, because the traditional teachers requires you to be present. And when the teacher starts saying something, the teacher then sees where your blockage is. Even though the blockage you might not be aware of, but that person sees it. And when he or she sees that something is blocking the student, then the teacher will make sure that let's do something about removing the block. And that can only happen when it's live. So Swamiji has constantly insisted on traditional teaching, which I did not appreciate before, because also I come from, an electronic Western mindset, and realizing the significance of a teacher, a live teacher in a room, is profound, and that can never be replaced. Of course, now because of our hectic lifestyles and what's going on in the world, we need to have that personal contact with the teacher, and then we can resort to other forms of electronic media. But that connection has to be made in person. And Swamiji now encourages, he says he doesn't mind, it's like you have to meet the teacher once, or you have to meet the guru a few times and really have a relationship, a personal relationship with that person, with that teacher. And then you can, Skype, or you can use the electronic media for teaching. So it's incredibly important. Otherwise, this teaching is not like getting another degree. It's not like, learning something new. The teaching is about it's about correcting a misunderstanding. Yeah. That is the teaching. The question is, how do you make that correction? The point of the guru is to correct something that you falsely think about yourself. A book will not do it. Electronic media will not do it. You need somebody else, like a mirror, to point it out to you. And the guru has we have this really lock-in, what I call a lock-in mechanism through Shraddha. Yeah, that Shraddha that you have for your teacher, you have that implicit trust towards your teacher, so that your teacher can prod you, poke you, and bring out those blockages and then remove it. By that commitment that you make to the teacher, you cannot back out of it. And because of that commitment, then the teacher has the leeway or the license to help you get through that journey. Unfortunately, what has happened lately is that, many of the gurus then tend to abuse that privilege, and that's another different topic altogether. But
actually, we find none of that over here in this beautiful parampara.
Yes, no, it's everywhere, and so like Swami just said, it takes a lot of grace, and depth of wisdom, and you just hope that your punya kind of leads you to the right teacher. My first ever teacher, my first ever guru was Pūjya Swāmiji, so I really blessed my what do you call stars, or my punya, to be able to come and meet the first teacher and be with him, the entire time. So
wonderful. So we can say that it's probably our collective punya that we are here today at the Gurukulam, listening to you share your wonderful views, and
thank you. Yeah.
Just to meet with Pūjya Swāmiji tomorrow, because tomorrow's Guru Purnima, and
yes,
a short speech. So I thought I'll just give our listeners or viewers a chance. My dad, and here's Varun, Karthik, Kunduti, myself, and so we are all here gathered with Swāmi Svātmānanda ji, and we are happy to sign off on that note. So would you like to close with a Mangalacharana or Shanti Mantra?
Yeah, please. We didn't start with one, so normally we should start one. We start with one and then we have to close it. But if we didn't start it, but we'll do it. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.